Hello, podcast listeners. You are now listening to the Coffee, Health, and Science podcast, brought to you by Purity Coffee. I'm your host, Jordan River, and I want to thank you for tuning in today. It's Antioxidants Part 2, everybody. You know we maximize our antioxidants here at Purity Coffee. It's one of our main points of focus. And we have our in-house coffee science expert on the line. Dr. Steve, a.k.a. Dr. Coffee, is on the phone. How you doing, Dr. Steve?
Never been better. Looked in the mirror this morning and I'm still breathing. I'm happy. So I'm here.
Love it, man. Love it. Such great insight on the last episode. If you haven't heard that, listeners, go check it out, talking about chlorogenic acid and caffeine and a lot of other compounds. But we're moving into part 2 today. You know that coffee is a beneficial plant when you need to split one part of the healthy compounds into 2 episodes. Am I right, Dr. Steve?
Absolutely, but it gave me a break to go make a fresh cup of Purity coffee, so I'm happy. So.
Love it. Love it, man. Well, let's move right into our next compound, our next antioxidant found in coffee, cafestol. You tell me what makes cafestol so special.
So cafestol, people are mixed up about it. It's really an interesting compound. They think that it's only found in caffeinated coffee and that the word cafestol, the C-A-F-E, is where you get cafe and caffeine and where you hint to cafe for coffees.
Wow.
But it's also present in decaf coffee. The nice thing about cafestol is it's supportive of other anti-inflammatory antioxidants in coffee. So if you'll remember, I talked about the fact that the sum is greater than the parts.
Yes.
The gestalt of coffee acts together. And cafestol is an anti-inflammatory that's supported by other antioxidants in the body. But what cafestol is able to do is 3 things. Go through the blood-brain barrier so it supports anti-inflammation in the brain.
Wow.
Which is supportive of memory, which is, as I always say to everybody, out of all the things I ever lost, I miss my mind the most.
Well, that's what's so stunning about coffee is the effect on the brain. And if it's anti-inflammatory on the brain, I can only imagine all-encompassing effects. But you're saying cafestol is a large part of that.
Cafestol is an anti-inflammatory that affects and helps improve memory. And cafestol also affects bile acid in the intestines. And if you read any of the literature now on people that are talking all about the microbiome of the gut, microbiome, that's the big word. That's heal the gut, look at the microbiome.
Right.
And they talk about the microbiome as being the second brain in the body.
Mm-hmm.
And that the microbiome, the gut, the ability to absorb nutrients, the ability to make reactions happen in the body, that affects the brain. And it's all through cafestol and its synergistic reactions with other antioxidants in caffeine.
That's so fascinating.
In coffee.
Yeah. That's super fascinating. And like you said, I've actually been pretty deeply involved in the thinking gut world. There's some incredible, if you just Google the mind gut link, it is exactly what you're saying. It is a more primal version of our brain. Actually, that's where our instincts live. That's why you get a drop in your stomach when you're having an emotional instinct attack. So yeah, really fascinating stuff. And anything you can do to keep your digestive system, to keep your intestines, to keep your stomach healthy, that's a huge leverage move for one's health, right, Dr. Steve?
It is. And what most people don't understand is that even for somebody that has their gallbladder taken out because they had gallstones or their gallbladder didn't function properly, you still have to use bile acids. And so we always tell people that have had their gallbladder or have gallbladder issues to take bile salts along with drinking coffee.
Wow.
And this is a little esoteric. You know, I stick more on the science side, and I'm not saying this is not scientific, but you've got these doctors who are really into cancer treatment, and they talk about coffee enemas as part of cancer treatment
Mm-hmm.
because of its effect on the intestine and bile acids.
Fascinating. And I have spoken with people about that, specifically about the bile duct in the liver. I'm sure we'll get into that, but yeah, that coffee enema is a bridge too far for me. But I've spoken to some really smart people who stand by it heavily. So it's like, wow, we're getting deep there. Pardon the pun, but fascinating nonetheless. The biology, right? The applicable biology is just super fascinating.
Absolutely. And the only reason I really haven't put time into studying is I happen to like my coffee with cream and sugar, and I just can't see doing that.
Oh man, Dr. Steve, you're such a pleasure to have on. I have so many podcasts, and it's really fun to have you on in the middle of them. We goof
Well,
around,
this is
and I
real
love it.
important stuff. The science is real important, and I won't ever. But you know what? All the science in the world, you still got to love life. So if I get to heaven and there's no coffee, it's not heaven.
Love it. The next compound that we're going to be exploring is melanoidins, responsible for coffee's aroma. Is that true? Now, I thought my initial question when you bring up coffee's aroma is maybe some terpenes, something like that provides aroma to a lot of different plants, terpenoids in nature. But melanoidins, I've never heard of.
Right. So they are responsible for coffee's aroma. They're part of that smell that's given off with the other chemicals. And, if we wanted to do the roasting at some point, if we wanted to do a podcast on the roasting process,
Sure.
I could talk about the other chemicals that are given and the chemicals that are in that sweet spot of when you should roast. But melanoidins are responsible for part of that enticing aroma that you smell. What's really interesting about them is that they're also related to the anti-inflammatory system that all of coffee works in. They're also antibacterial. So those two entities, along with smelling delicious, is a nice thing to have in coffee.
So the antibacterial compounds, how are they helping? How are they helping us? Is that getting rid of the bad bacteria in the gut? Is that good for the teeth? Why is the antibacterial part important?
So the antibacterial part is important because our immune system is in charge of policing the whole body.
Everywhere.
It's in charge of everything.
Okay.
And more cancer treatments now are leaning towards ways of rounding up the immune system. And if you and I ever went off of coffee and did a podcast on the gut,
Mm-hmm.
and we talked about the microbiome and what we need to do, what's another alternative to putting probiotics in there, and what it would be is figuring out a police system to get rid of the bad guys. So what melanoidins does is it helps police the body for bacterial systems that are awry in the body and helps clean it up. And it does that by also being able to decrease inflammation. So when you look at all chronic diseases, we're talking about needing antibacterial and anti-inflammatory properties.
Jeez, fascinating stuff. Our final compound, you're going to need to help me with this pronunciation. Trigonoline?
Trigonoline.
Trigonoline. Talk to me about it.
Yeah. It's a bitter alkaloid, so it's a bitter pronunciation as well. And this also combines with melanoidins to create the smell that you smell in coffee.
Mm-hmm.
So the unique aroma that you get is from trigonoline. it also has antibacterial properties. And remember, I keep saying that there's this synergistic relationship between all these chemicals.
Hmm.
And I don't want to keep not saying it over and over, but the gestalt, the sum is greater than all of the parts.
That's the big
So when you
takeaway.
have,
I like that.
exactly, when you have this trigonal and you have melanoidins working together hand in hand, they may be working at different places. So you've got capistol that's working with bile acids. You've got trigonal that's working with gum disease and supporting oral health. But together, it's one big anti-inflammatory process going on. So you're healing the whole body.
That's a really powerful statement you just said. You're healing the whole body. But, I wanted to talk about the effects of roasting on this particular compound. You got to get it just right. Again, this is what Purity specializes in. We work with scientists at the coffee labs in Vanderbilt University to make sure you dial it in. But talk to me about these levels before the coffee's roasted, when they're roasted properly, and then when they're over roasted.
Right. So when you have green coffee, so you take the coffee cherry and you get this green bean, I'll call it, and that has trigonal in it. When you roast it and you get to a medium roast, you have 10 times higher amounts of trigonal in the bean.
Wow.
When you then dark roast it, you have less. The trigonal degrades, so it's almost like you've burnt off. When my wife makes like a pasta sauce, there's a sweet spot between when you boil off too much water and it becomes too thick versus when you boil off the right amount of water and it's the right consistency.
Right.
All of
Right.
these chemicals are dependent upon the right roasting. And the darker the roast, the less trigonal. The lighter the roast, the less trigonal. There's a sweet spot in it. And why is that? That's what you really need to ask yourself. And the answer is, it's because if we could measure it, it would tell us where the proper roasting for coffee cherries, coffee beans should be.
Right. I mean, heat
also,
and time does a lot. It goes a long way in chemistry.
Yes, it really does. It really does. It changes the structure, and if you roast it properly. But we also know that Arabica, which is the preferred bean over Robusta, Arabica has a much higher, significant amount more trigonal than Robusta.
That tends to be the case with most of the compounds, at least my understanding, what we found at Purity Coffee. Again, I'll make sure I'm going to have some of these Vanderbilt coffee scientists on. But there are some properties that the other breeds of coffee excel in. And that's what we're working on at Purity as well, is different blends. Finding out, maybe a 20-80 blend, Robusta to Arabica would be better for diabetes. And that's the diabetic blend. We're going to really dial that stuff in. One of the many things that I'm excited about over at Purity Coffee. Dr. Steve, what about instant coffee? I know that some of the health benefits are retained with low quality coffees or instant coffees. Is it worth it? Is there something there? You tell me.
In my opinion, the issues with the bad chemicals, which we haven't gone into yet, what I call the good, the bad, and the ugly, the issues with those chemicals like molds outweighs drinking a poor quality coffee. So I would say absolutely not.
Dr. Steve, maybe some parting words on oxidation, antioxidants, and coffee. Is there any higher leverage move that's just so easy to incorporate in your everyday life that'll give you these kind of antioxidant benefits?
As your listeners are going to see or hear when we go through the different podcasts, I've made it a study to look at the different scientific studies out there for coffee, and I've compared it to other antioxidants. And the biggest bang for the buck one can get with regard to improving their health, cutting down all-cause mortality, decreasing all the diseases we're going to go through, cancer and diabetes and heart disease and Parkinson's, all the different diseases. You get the absolutely biggest bang for the buck by drinking a good roasted medicinal blend coffee.
Dr. Steve, thank you so much for taking the time to do this, my friend. This was enlightening as usual.
It was my pleasure. I love being on the podcast with you. And everybody, remember, if you need any questions answered, go to ibleedcoffee.com.
Love it. Love it. Everybody out there, thank you so much for listening. We'll see you next time on the Coffee, Health, and Science Podcast.